Hi, and happy C.S. Lewis Reading Day, everybody. Today is not a typical episode for us. This is a special release set aside to honor the life and work of one of the most beloved authors of the last century, C.S. Lewis. Each year on November 29th, readers around the world pause to revisit his stories, reflect on his impact, and appreciate the remarkable way his words continue to teach us today. So there are lots of Lewis-related events happening today, with the main event hosted by the Pint with Jack podcast. And I'll include the link in the show notes here so you can easily find it. And they've put together several great ways that we can all participate. So if you're a Lewis fan or even just mildly interested, definitely check it out. Today's the day. But in case you haven't met us before, hi, I'm Jody, and I'm here with my brother Stephen. And between the two of us, Stephen is by far the true Lewis enthusiast, as he's read just about everything Lewis ever wrote. So I'm going to let him tell you about this year's theme and what we're doing to support this year's reading day.
This year's theme is C.S. Lewis, and it's about his family and love of family. And for me, this is basically an excuse to talk about somebody that I admire greatly and who has really impacted my life. I tend to think it's dangerous looking too much into the lives of authors or heroes in general. Heroes tend to let you down. The more you read about historical figures or people that have done great things, often you find skeletons in the closet. And so it's something you always want to do with caution. I have been grateful and blessed and delighted that the more I read about C.S. Lewis as a man, the more I like him. One of the other reasons why, for a while, I was hesitant to read too much about Lewis as a person actually goes back to some of his opinions and J.R.R. Tolkien's opinions. They both believed that any literary work should stand on its own, that you should read the work for the story it is and get out of it what the work merits. They really had a problem with dissecting the life of an author around any story because they didn't think it added anything to it, and in many cases it would subtract from it because you would then attribute all sorts of things in the story from the life of the author that may or may not be supported by the piece. And so it's a little bit funny to me that I'm going to talk quite a lot about the life of this, my favorite author, when that wasn't something he was terribly a fan of, but I think I'm justified on some level because he did seem to change his opinion at least a little over the course of his life, if I'm reading his works correctly. In some of his early letters, he spoke specifically about how, oh, it's okay, my friend, you can go ahead and say whatever you want because only an absolute cad or a beast would actually read these personal letters. I felt bad.
That's you. That's a lot of people, actually.
But then later on, his brother actually collected all of what are called the Lewis papers. And these weren't just Lewis. And in fact, these weren't primarily C.S. Lewis. These were his parents, his family. And then C.S. Lewis himself actually got into kind of collecting and compiling letters. And shortly after his death, C.S. Lewis's brother, Warren Hamilton Lewis, also known as Warnie, actually compiled a group of his letters. And that's really where I'm getting a lot of the information I'm going to talk about today.
It is something I never looked into before doing this podcast, actually, was the author's history. And now we do it every episode, and I love it. I learned so much, and it doesn't really change a story for me, but it's interesting to know, I think, something about their background. So this idea of family for Lewis, because I didn't know anything about, I read Narnia forever ago and several times since then, but what kind of man can write the Chronicles of Narnia, but also everything else he wrote? Such as a spectrum and wide breadth of both fiction and nonfiction. Amazing. So I think it's really interesting to know something about him. I think it actually adds something to his writings as opposed to reframing it, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, and I think it's true if you happen to be a great man and a saint.
That helps a lot.
Which I think C.S. Lewis is. And it would be a natural tendency, if you were wanting to go into the life of C.S. Lewis and learn about his interactions with his family, to go to what he wrote himself, particularly his autobiography, Surprised by Joy. And you can learn a lot from that. And Warnie references that a lot. His brother talks about that book a lot. But he very clearly states that's his spiritual autobiography. And he skips things. There are entire things about his life, and particularly his relationship with family members, that aren't in that book. And so where I first really felt like I got to know C.S. Lewis as a man, as much as one can from reading about somebody, is through the letters of C.S. Lewis. His own letters are fascinating and tell us a lot, but this particular volume is not the complete letter set. That's different. That comes in a 3-volume set. This is a short book that was curated and edited by his brother, Warnie Lewis. And more than that, there's a memoir that Warnie writes at the beginning, and it is wonderful and really opens a window onto the life of C.S. Lewis.
Yeah, so 2 things. Tell us first kind of the general family tree for Mr. C.S. Lewis, and the name of that book, because I looked for it and couldn't find it.
The name of the book I'm holding in my hand is just titled Letters of C.S. Lewis, edited with a memoir by W.H. Lewis.
Yeah, I found one similar, but it was the introduction and memoir was from Walter Hooper, who was not literal family, but kind of adopted family, I would say.
Yeah, Walter Hooper was actually an American who went to visit C.S. Lewis in the last year of his life. He was a fan, but C.S. Lewis roped him into being his personal secretary. And Walter Hooper lived with him for those last several months of his life in 1963 until his passing. And then Walter Hooper spent the rest of his life dedicated to getting the works of C.S. Lewis published and preserved. So those of us who love C.S. Lewis, we should really love Walter Hooper too. And we owe an incalculable debt of gratitude to him and for the work he did. He has gone to be with the Lord himself. He passed recently, but so grateful for everything he did for us and for C.S. Lewis and his legacy.
Yeah, agreed. So tell us about the family tree.
C.S. Lewis is the second son of Florence Augusta Lewis, his mother, also known as Flora, and Albert James Lewis. Interesting people. Their first son was Warren Hamilton Lewis, born in 1895, and then, of course, C.S. Lewis, born in 1898. Flora was an amazing woman. She was of the Hamilton family. Lewis was her married name. Hamilton was her pre-marriage name. She was the first woman to ever graduate from Queen's College Belfast with a degree in mathematics.
Really? I didn't know that.
She was cool-headed, brilliant, smart, kind. Everything about her, I hear, is amazing. His father was very much a contrast in several ways. His father was a lawyer, a solicitor in Ireland, and he was kind of big and bombastic. He loved to speak. It goes with the idea of being a lawyer, I think, the ability to persuade and speak. But he was also very punctual and very consistent in his habits. So Warnie in this memoir talks about them going on these seaside village holidays that were an extended thing, and he was never happy there. He just wanted to get back to work. He would be looking at his clock. And so I think that the pair of them, Albert and Flora, actually made a really good pair, because I think they had personality characteristics that complemented one another. They could sort of make up for each other's weaknesses. Unfortunately, very early in C.S. Lewis's life, his mother died. Before the age of 10, Flora had passed from cancer. They watched it happening. And so then what you have is C.S. Lewis with his brother Warnie and his father Albert, and that was the family until he went off to boarding school.
So I read a little bit from just kind of a variety of sources. I've learned so much more about the Lewis family in the past week than I ever knew. Flora, love the name, by the way. Flora's an excellent name. But yeah, it seemed like Warnie and Jack were kind of partners from early on with the loss of their mother. I mean, that's hard.
They were so close from an early age. When you read through Surprised by Joy, C.S. Lewis, who went by Jack, had nothing but kind things to say about his brother. He would talk about a book that they went in together on at a young age. They pooled their money to buy it. And he speaks about the great heroicism he recognizes now in his brother, because he realizes Warnie had no interest in this book and contributed the only money he had because he knew Jack would love it. I mean, that is wonderful. The two of them were also collaborators. They grew up in Ireland, and it was rainy, and they were in the house most of the time, surrounded by books, but they also had paper and pens. And so they would read and they would talk and they would write stories and plays. And from early on, Jack's delight was very much in the fantasy and talking animals and the Middle Ages and sword fights and all these things that show up in his writing. Warnie was far more practical. He loved steam engines and ships and sailing and machines and modern things and, above all else, India. He loved the idea of India. And so they would write stories together that blended these things, where you would have these, a talking frog king in the land of India with a steamship. I mean, it's just wonderful. And this is where a lot of people have heard of the Boxen stories. Mm-hmm. Boxen was the name of the world that they created. I mean, it's not Narnia, but kind of like Narnia is the world. Boxen was their world together. And they wrote a lot. You can still find a bunch of these things, and they're fun. I was reading through one play, and the amount of just archaic speech that he was doing at like 10 years old, forsooth, showed up a lot. in the play. It was great. It was fun. But Warnie and Jack were close really from the beginning. And Surprised by Joy, Jack also talks about where Warnie brought to him a fairy model. So where he built this thing to look like a fairy playground scene set. And this was one of Jack's first experiences with this idea of longing, which people who read C.S. Lewis know that's a recurring theme over the course of his life, this idea of a desire, a longing, the sweet longing. And he found that for one of the first times in one of these things that Warnie just made. So important as young kids, and they were so close together.
Warnie modeled fairyland for his brother?
Yeah.
Made out of what?
Like moss in a shoebox. I mean, that sort of thing.
He made a fairy garden.
He made a fairy garden.
Oh, that's really sweet.
And so, and Jack talks about it, how he just thought it was the most beautiful thing ever. Again, these little boys, without a mother, but they had each other.
Mm-hmm. So what was the relationship with their dad like?
Awkward. Warnie always kind of got along better with people than Jack did. Jack was brilliant, but couldn't always do the social thing and couldn't always get along kind of the way Warnie did. And this was at a time when things like boarding school were a very real thing. And so Warnie left. He went off to boarding school. He went off to take courses and classes. And Jack was left by himself. And then Jack got sent off to boarding school and hated it. Some of the same schools that Warnie did really well at and made friends at, Jack referred to them by the name of a concentration camp, Belsen, because he hated it so much. And it was challenging for Jack with his father. And for his whole life, that was actually a really challenging relationship. And C.S. Lewis actually describes later how he has a lot of regrets about how that all played out. His father was a single dad, and I don't think really knew how to do it. I think he tried to be friends with his boys, but he didn't really understand his boys. And the way he tried to befriend them really kind of smothered them. Particularly a kind of a sensitive guy like Jack. So Jack wanted to talk his own thoughts. He wanted to speak about stories. He wanted quiet, things like that. And his father just didn't get that. He would just come kind of storming in. Jack would never have his best friend Arthur Greaves come over to visit, because if they did, the two of them wouldn't get to talk. Their dad would just talk. And it would kind of spoil the whole thing. And so Jack became kind of more and more aloof as time went by. Again, the relationship with his brother was strong all through, even after his brother went off to college, and then his brother actually went off to the military academy and became an officer. Every time he came home, every time he got to see Jack, the two of them just picked it up where they left off. For his father, though, he became more and more aloof. And then C.S. Lewis himself joined the military. This is World War I. And there were two things that I think really kind of broke the relationship with his father to even more of a degree. One is Jack got his orders to go to France, and he begged his father to come and visit him. Warnie talks about this in his memoir, that his dad probably didn't really understand what Jack was asking. And his father was such a creature of habit, of routine, that he couldn't imagine leaving his job for a couple days to go across the Irish Sea and go visit his son before he went to war. Jack couldn't understand why his father didn't come to visit him before he went to war. And so that was the first one. And then the second one was when Jack got injured. So Jack got blowed up in World War I. He carried shrapnel in his body for the rest of his life. It was a serious injury. Warnie hopped on a motorcycle and drove and drove and drove through like occupied territory to try and find his brother, and found him cheerfully reading in a hospital. But that's how much Warnie cared and how much he loved his brother and what he was willing to do for him. Jack got moved back to England where he was convalescing, and he begged his father to come visit him. He's a war-wounded soldier, and his father never came to visit him. And so they had a very strained relationship. Jack, though, was an academic. He was a guy going to school, and so he couldn't support himself. He had to pay for college. And Albert paid for his college long beyond when it would have been considered normal. Jack ended up extending his studies by several years because he couldn't find a job, and Albert Lewis supported him throughout that time. And so it's not that they didn't like each other, and it's not that there was a true rupture, but there was a break in the relationship, and there's a few other things that we're going to get into in a moment that I think made that worse.
I mean, families are complicated on a good day.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know. I'm not an expert at any of this, but I mean, that to me, just looking from the outside, sounds like his dad didn't know how to love him in the way he was expecting, but paying for as long as he could. I mean, maybe that's what he thought love looked like.
I think so. I think his father loved him. I think he loved his father. And I do think he regretted later in life how things kind of went down, because his father died not too long after. His father died in 1929. And so C.S. Lewis didn't get to have kind of an adult, mature relationship with his father where he was independent of him financially. I think things probably would have gotten better at that point, but he never got that opportunity. And again, there was one other thing that kind of split. And this is something that I first learned about from Warnie, because Jack doesn't mention it at all in Surprised by Joy. When C.S. Lewis joined the military, by an accent of alphabet, he got stuck with somebody named Patrick or Paddy Moore. Paddy Moore was an Irishman about his own age, and the two became very good friends. These are two Irishmen fighting in World War I. They went different ways, but it was thought that they made kind of an agreement with each other. Paddy's mother was alive. She was married, but separated from her husband and kind of on her own. Jack's father was alive. He was a widower and on his own. And so the two of them kind of had an agreement that if something happened to the one, the other would take care of the other's remaining parent. Paddy died, and Jack seems to have taken this seriously, and for the rest of Mrs. Moore's life, Jack was her primary confidant, family member, and caregiver. She essentially took over the role of a mother to him, but it was really awkward. This is a married woman, probably in her, I don't know how old she was, late 30s, early 40s.
I thought they weren't that different in age, and that was part of the complicating thing about it.
She was Paddy Moore's mom, and so she was old enough to be Jack's mother, but not so old that him living with her wouldn't cause a scandal. Mm-hmm. She also had a daughter who was younger than Jack, a little girl named Moraine, who was also in the house. They did visit with Jack before he went to go to war. They did look after him when he came back and was convalescing. And they essentially, I think, took over that family role that his father had kind of given up without knowing it by refusing to be a part of it. And from that point on, Jack actually spent a lot of time lying to his dad. It's really interesting going through the letters because he was hiding the fact that he was essentially living as a family man, taking care of these two women. And so the money that his father was sending him to support him as a bachelor in college was plenty for a bachelor in college. It's not enough to run a household on. And so he was always very, very poor. And he always tried to hide the fact that this was his actual situation from his father up till the time his father died. There's interesting letters between Albert and Warnie where they're basically asking each other, what is going on here? What is Jack doing? Do we need to be worried?
Warnie didn't know?
Warnie did eventually. Right at first, I'm not sure how much Warnie knew, but Warnie would come visit with Jack every chance he got. And Jack wasn't hiding this from Warnie. So Warnie knew the situation to the point that when Warnie actually retired from the military, Warnie came to live with Jack and Mrs. Moore when they finally came into Jack's sort of forever home, the Kilns. And so then Warnie lived with Jack and Mrs. Moore until Mrs. Moore died in, I can't remember the exact year, many years later. I think it was in 1950, but I could be wrong on that.
And I only know a little bit about her from something you mentioned in an episode that he went to visit her every day when as she was getting older. His compassion and love for the people around him, immediately around him. It seems like he was socially awkward kind of always, but man, when he found people who he bonded with, he was incredibly loyal.
Yeah, the more I read about him, the more I believe that is true. And in very drudge-like ways even. He was doing laundry and dishes. This was in a time when everybody hired a maid. But Mrs. Moore was impossible to work for and drove away maids because they were never up to her standards. Jack would therefore do all the work. He would do cooking, he would do cleaning, he would do dishes, he would help her making jam. I mean, his letters and his diary are full of this sort of thing. So you have this brilliant, just genius who is doing all the day-to-day things of sweeping up and really giving up a lot of his time to do it.
I mean, a man who can do the dishes, that's a good thing.
He was a man who not only could, but did. And so, yeah, that was just the kind of guy he was. And he did that to the point that people commented on. They really thought, Warnie really thought, I think, that Mrs. Moore was taking advantage of him. And I think she probably was. But on the flip side, for Jack, he had a mother again. He had a family. He had this thing around him that he wanted. And as I read through his letters and as I read through his diaries, I don't see any indication that he resented it. That was the life he wanted. Now, I'm sure he wanted more money. I'm sure he wanted less stress. I'm sure he wanted, maids to do the work and not him. But he was never going to give up Mrs. Moore, and he didn't to the day she died.
When his brother moved in, all four lived together. Mm-hmm. Mrs. Moore, her daughter, and then C.S. Lewis, Jack, and his brother.
Yeah. And then, of course, at some point, Maureen got married, I think, and ended up leaving. And she's got some interesting stories we'll talk about later in life. But yeah, for a long time, it was Jack, Warnie, and Mrs. Moore.
When did he get married? Was it before Mrs. Moore passed?
No, after. So long as Mrs. Moore was alive, he did not, the impression seems to be that he did not see himself free to marry. We don't really know what the relationship was between him and Mrs. Moore. In his letters and his journals, everything I read, he talks about her as his mother. That's the term he uses. But there is definitely a school of scholarship that talks about the idea that they had a romantic relationship, at least before he came to Christ. I have not found that, but I don't have access to all his stuff, and so I don't know one way or the other. But it does seem that until she passed, he did not see himself free to pursue romantic relationships, and he thought he was going to be a bachelor for the rest of his life. He kind of loved being a bachelor. He loved male companionship. His best friends were male. If you read through the Four Loves, he talks about philia, this idea of friendship as just a beautiful and a wonderful thing. And Warnie talks at length about just what a good friend he was. How at the end of the day, right, when you kick your shoes off and you got a drink in your hand, that Jack was just brilliant. He was just great at give and take and banter and jokes and laughter. He was just larger than life in these rooms. And Tolkien talks a bit about that as well. And the friends he made, he was such good friends with. I mean, reading through his letters, I feel like I kind of know Owen Barfield a little bit. I feel like I kind of know Charles Williams a little bit. I feel like I kind of know Arthur Greaves. And I don't get to see their letters, but I get to see how Lewis interacted with them. And he was such a deep and a good friend. I think the whole romantic thing with his wife came out of nowhere. This is a pushy American woman.
I've heard that.
Joy Davidman is wonderful, and I regret that I don't know more about her yet. It is one of the goals of my life to learn more about this woman, because the woman that swept C.S. Lewis off his feet has to be somebody just spectacular and special, and I really think she was. She was a fan. She and her husband had both read a lot of C.S. Lewis. Her husband was broken. He was sick in many ways. He went to war as well. He never came back the same. He had problems and ended up leaving her, I think, to marry his cousin or something. It's a weird situation. But you had Joy then with two little boys, and she was on her own. But she was brilliant. She was smart. She was an author and a poet herself. And she was a fan of C.S. Lewis. And so she had made her way over to England after being a pen pal with him for a long time. C.S. Lewis wrote voluminously, letters every day, and some of those letters were from C.S. Lewis or from Joy Davidman, and I got to read some of the first ones. And then it's funny, in some of the other letters, he describes this annoying lady that came to stay with him over the Christmas break, because she came and hung out with him at his house, and he couldn't get rid of her. But then it turned into something else. She was in so many ways this intellectual equal. Again, she was brilliant. She would push back against him. She would argue with him. And she loved him for years. Some of her writing is extant. And she wrote sonnets about him. And the idea that somebody lusted after C.S. Lewis is kind of weird to me. But she did. And she went after him. He eventually marries her, which caused everybody to take a double take, because one of the other things about her is she had cancer and she was dying, and they knew that. And so he married her essentially as a green card marriage, or whatever the British version is, because she was going to have to go back to the States. It seems clear, and it's hard to tell, but it seems clear that that initial marriage was not a romantic thing, at least not on his end, that this was an act so that she could stay in Britain. Didn't take long, though, before they got an actual marriage under God. He talked a priest into coming and doing a second marriage, because the first one he viewed only as a civil marriage. This is kind of against the rules, yet somehow he did it. He talked a priest to come in and marry them, and they were wildly in love for the rest of the time they had together. Incredible stories. She got better. She went into full remission from this advanced cancer, but it wasn't without pain and it wasn't without problems. There's a wonderful story where C.S. Lewis, she had cancer throughout her bones and it was just hurting her. And he prayed that he could take that pain on himself. And the story goes that the doctors were amazed because her bones got stronger. She stopped having pain. All of a sudden, he goes to the doctor and he's got osteoporosis. Now, he also smoked 4 packs of cigarettes a day or more, but I think there's more to it than that. It's just a wonderful story. And this awkward bachelor, Dawn, falls madly in love with this woman, and they get 3 years together. They get to travel somewhat. They get to go to Greece. C.S. Lewis never traveled other than Ireland. That was the only place he ever went. And France for the military, but he went to Greece with her. She did things for him and opened up parts of his life that had just never existed before that time. There are many that would consider Till We Have Faces C.S. Lewis's best book, and I can certainly see the logic behind that because it is a masterpiece. Joy Davidman helped him with that. In fact, there was some discussion about whether she should be the co-author on it. She was such a big influence on it. And so if you wonder how C.S. Lewis all of a sudden seems to know about women until We Have Faces, I'm not so sure he did, but Joy Davidman certainly did. And I think that helped him a lot during that.
Yeah, if you haven't read it, that one's written from the perspective of a woman. The whole book, start to finish, I believe. Yeah, all from the same perspective of a woman, which that is different. I mean, I'm trying to think if there's other books that he wrote from a perspective of a woman. I don't think so. I mean, you hear a little bit of Lucy's thoughts and things in Narnia. I don't know. You've read more. He
has strong female characters, but not another one quite like that. No.
Yeah, it is a special thing.
The other one that's close in That Hideous Strength, Jane. He does a lot from her point of view, but it's not the same as Till We Have Faces.
So I know very little about the life of Joy Davidman or really her passing, but I did read Grief Observed a while ago now, where C.S. Lewis, after his wife's death, journals his grief for, a year? I don't know if it's the best thing, but man, for someone to express their grief and be so vulnerable, I thought it was very brave. I mean, that
Yes.
sounds a little cliche, but a massively brave book to write. Did that one come out after he died or before?
Before. He first published it under a pseudonym, and people kept giving him copies of it, saying this might help you in your grief. I think it was T.S. Eliot who saw the pseudonym and said, nope, that's Jack. He just knew it and said, Jack, you got to do this under your name. And so the first editions, I think, were under a pseudonym. But then after that, I mean, it became clear that he was the one who wrote it. And yeah, it is such a powerful and stunning and amazing piece of work. And maybe we'll talk it through it one of these days because it's one of my favorite things he ever wrote. It's not easy reading.
Grief is never easy.
But it is powerful, and I don't really know anything else like it. She impacted his life in ways that are just unmeasurable.
Yeah, if you're talking about family love, I mean, the idea of how you grieve someone that you love and your family, it's beautiful and hard, but amazing.
Yeah. Can I tell just a couple more stories about Joy Davidman and C.S. Lewis? Because I love these.
Do it.
I have had the privilege of hearing their son. So C.S. Lewis adopted their son. She actually had two, but you usually only hear about Douglas Gresham. He had a brother named David Gresham. He had some problems, near as I can tell, and I don't know as much about him, but Douglas Gresham is an amazing man. He has written himself, he has lived an incredible life, and he'll go on podcasts and to conferences and tell stories about his memories of C.S. Lewis, who adopted him and took him into his family, and they're wonderful, and Douglas Gresham is just amazing. But there were a couple of stories he told that I just loved. He talked about how C.S. Lewis and Joy would play Scrabble. But they don't play Scrabble the way we humans play Scrabble. They would like combine multiple sets together so they had more letters, and you were allowed to use a word from any language.
Oh.
And they would just try and fill up the board. They would just try and fill up the board. And he tells a story how once there was a word that I think Jack tried to play, and they argued about it and couldn't decide, so they brought in Warnie to officiate. And Warnie penalized them both for bothering him or something, or it was just hilarious. So, and in that family life, Warnie talks about that in his memoir about how when Jack got married, Joy was going to come to the kiln, and so he figured, okay, I guess I'm out. He was going to try and find a house over in Ireland where he was from, and neither Jack nor Joy would hear about it. Both said, no, you're our family. You are staying here. And Warnie loved Joy. Just absolutely loved her, which is fascinating because a lot of people in C.S. Lewis's circle didn't. She was younger than him. She was this upstart American. She was a fan, obviously a gold digger. Many people did not like her at all.
How can she be a gold digger if she's terminal?
Well, I don't know, but this was kind of the attitude. Never from Warnie. So everything I read is that Warnie just thought she was wonderful. And in fact, when she died, it crushed not only Jack, but Warnie too. Warnie had some trouble with alcohol over the course of his life, and this threw him into some alcoholic binges because he just grieved and missed her so much. The other story I want to say, well, there's two of them. One is about that trip to Greece. I am told that, or I've read or heard, I can't remember where I came across this story, but I know the specifics enough that I can't have made it up. So here it is. They were walking up essentially a mountain in Greece, and Jack's, smoked a ton. He's not in the best shape. She has cancer, and so they're going slow. And apparently somebody kind of pushed by. This really grumpy woman was very rude to them and accosted them and wanted to get by them. And I think he said something like, oh, go drop dead, right? He said something mean, which apparently he never did. That was really rare for him. Well, they walk up to the top of the hill, and that lady had had a heart attack. It crushed Jack because he felt that he had acted not out of love, not out of charity. He was very convicted. Apparently, Joy thought it was the funniest thing ever. And she came back and told this story.
That's a little dark.
Yeah, but on some level, like, again, I think Jack needed her. I think they viewed the world in different ways.
Careful what you say.
Yeah. And then the other one that, again, just speaks to, I think, how tough this woman was. So Jack lived at the kilns, and at the time, there was property around it. So they could go on hikes and walks. There was a pond he would swim in, things like that. Well, they were out walking, but she's an American, and apparently she carried a shotgun with her. Ooh. That's just what she did as an American.
Was it Annie Oakley?
A little bit. And so I heard Douglas Gresham tell this story. They were walking, and a tramp or something came by, and Jack immediately, I think he might have pulled a knife. I don't know all the details. Jack immediately stepped in front of her, which, good for you. That's the right thing to do. She immediately said, "Jack, get out of the way. You're blocking my shot." The guy ran.
I got this.
Yeah. I just think that's perfect and beautiful and wonderful. And the two were just incredible together. So, yeah, Jack is a family man. I mean, there's good and bad there, right? I mean, you see nobility and you see regret. He's got wonderful relationships with his brother. He's got great relationships with his wife, brief though that was. He has this dedicated relationship with Mrs. Moore, and you could argue how healthy that was in what ways, but his dedication is admirable. I can't view it in any other way. He certainly has regrets about his interactions and relationship with his father, and then he had very good interactions working with his stepsons, these two children that came into his life because he loved their mother. And again, I'm so grateful for the life of C.S. Lewis. I mean, I'm grateful for everything he wrote, but if he never wrote a word, I would still be inspired by the way he lived as a man and the way he interacted with his family.
Well, you talked a lot about Joy Davidman, which I was not expecting because I looked up Warnie.
Warnie is great.
I'm not done on Warnie. Can we go back a little bit? So, have you heard of the book Brothers and Friends?
I have not.
Warnie apparently is not entirely dissimilar from his very academic brother. He wrote in a diary every single day of his life. I forget at what age he began. I want to say early 20s, but I'm sorry if I'm wrong. Do you know?
It was young, yeah.
Fairly young. Every single day. I mean, I kept a 2-week journal for an international trip, and that was hard to remember to do it every day. Every single day of his life. I mean, I looked up the book. Yeah. It's expensive because it's huge. It's so many words.
But it is so important. That book is the reason we know almost everything we know about the Inklings. Because at the Inklings meeting, it was always Lewis, it was usually Warnie, and then others came and went. I mean, people know about Tolkien, and he was certainly there a lot. But sometimes it was just C.S. Lewis and Warnie and Charles Williams, or other people would come and go. But he would describe those things in his journal. And so we can learn about the interaction of these great minds and great friends thanks to what Warnie wrote down.
I mean, it is amazing. And so I did read that Warnie was also his younger brother's, C.S. Lewis's secretary for years and years. And so did he just handle all correspondence? And so he'd hand, like, because Jack clearly wrote personally to so many people. It just all kind of filtered through Warnie?
Warnie did a ton of it. Warnie would type up, Jack would dictate some, and Warnie would type it out. When you're reading through Jack's letters, it's funny because every once in a while he'll say, yeah, my secretary isn't here for this week, so I have to write by hand. Please, I apologize for the penmanship as he was writing by pen. Jack was never going to type. Warnie had a typewriter. And so he would type up a lot of this stuff for Jack and was massive in terms of the correspondence, which was massive and sucked up so much of C.S. Lewis's time. And in fact, there's a number of letters, too, where C.S. Lewis was indisposed for whatever reason, ill or sick or couldn't do it, and Warnie would just write a letter back because C.S. Lewis took it as a duty to respond to every letter written to him. And Warnie took it as his job to assist his brother in doing this. And yeah, just incredibly helpful.
Yeah, and he wrote things to
Yes.
But you mentioned India as kind of his area of fascination. Was that just as a kid? Because I read that he wrote things on, I think, French history, or is it language?
French history. Mostly as a kid, the fascination with India. I think he was always interested in the East. As an officer, he actually spent quite a lot of time in China. When Jack was kind of coming back to Christianity, Warnie was following his own path to Christianity. He talks about this incredible episode where he was actually looking at a Buddhist statue. And it was this statue that gave him this numinous experience that kind of brought him back to the Christian faith. It's just fascinating to me. Apparently, there was a little Buddha statue in the kilns. I've heard people say they've seen it there. So he was a world traveler. He was a military man. He was a major in the military. He served in World War I. Basically tried to retire, but then got called back for World War II. And so he spent a long time in that. But yeah, spent a lot of time in the East and in the Orient. But professionally, or that's not the right word. When he retired and ended up living with C.S. Lewis and kind of hanging out with him, he sort of needed something to do. And so his first task was to organize what he called the Lewis Papers. And this was all this correspondence and kind of family history going back generations. And he did. And it was volumes of this stuff. And he found he kind of liked doing this. During his military days, especially in World War I, he spent a fair amount of time in France, became fluent in French, and became really an expert on French history. I want to say Louis XIV, but my French history is weak and I have not read this book. But yeah, he was a noted scholar on French royal history. And these were the passages he would read to the Inklings meetings. And there are many that argue that C.S. Lewis may not have been actually the best writer in the family, because Warnie was really good.
I haven't read anything of his. I don't know.
The most of Warnie's work I've read is a wonderful book that I highly recommend called The Major and the Missionary. Usually we think of Warnie just in relation to his much more famous younger brother. But Warnie was an incredible man in his own right. And the book, The Major and the Missionary, starts off because of this book that I talked about, The Letters of C.S. Lewis with the Memoir. This woman who is a missionary, I can't remember where, I think somewhere in Africa, wrote him, not C.S. Lewis, wrote Warnie and said, I just read this book. Of course, I've read some things your brother has written, but I loved your memoir, and I'm fascinated by how you did this. I actually have come into keeping of a lot of letters in my own family, and I want to know, how did you go about writing this compilation of letters? And what then that kicked off was like a 20-year correspondence between them. They never met in person. After Warnie died, I think she got to see his grave in England. But they kept talking about meeting someday. And it's just wonderful because they're talking about just life and stuff and writing. They're talking about their prayer lives. They're talking about arguments over, the troubles in Northern Ireland. Because again, Warnie's Irish. It's just beautiful. And it's just this friendship that develops between this missionary and Major Warnie Lewis. And it's a great, great book.
So the book is their letters together?
Yes.
Back and forth?
Yes.
Oh, that's very cool.
Yeah, I have it on my shelf. I'll loan it to you.
I guess I didn't realize that that C.S. Lewis even had siblings. Sorry, Warnie, because I've learned a lot this week. He had one sibling, but that they worked in the same area, and not even in the same area, but together on really the work of Lewis. I mean, did they discuss plot of Jack's books and things?
I'm sure they did. I don't know how much Warnie critiqued. I don't know how much editing role he played, but yeah, they would always talk about stuff. And I've read through some things where Lewis would, he'd put down a book and like throw it at Warnie and say, check out page 45 or something. And they would just talk back and forth. I mean, again, both brilliant men. They loved each other. They cared about each other. And that relationship consisted throughout their lives.
So I know Lewis put himself or pieces of himself into several different stories. Do you think Warnie's in there too?
Oh, that's a great question.
I was just curious, if you're writing yourself, I mean, you have to pull examples from the people that you care about, or people you really didn't like. So maybe he wrote about that lady on the mountain somehow. I don't know.
I am sure Warnie shines through his work. I do not have an answer for that.
Oh, think about it.
Head.
I'd be curious if you can think of examples.
I'm sure a true Lewis scholar would, because how can that not factor into his writing? But that's a great question, and I will think about it.
You know, I asked ChatGPT for questions like about Lewis and family love and all these things. They're lame. The robots, man, they don't really get what it means to have a relationship. Like the stuff that I care about, like, did they laugh? I mean, did they have like good time? I love the
Yes.
story about the fairy garden and what's it, Buxton or Boxon, the land.
Boxon.
But that's when they were children. Are there stories in his memoir about their just times together or anything
Yes.
like that?
Yes, he talks about really what a just jovial character he was and how fun it was to just be talking. He talks about the Inklings meetings and then the gatherings that would happen in the rooms at night. He was a night owl, and when the wine and ale started flowing and they started just talking, yes, there was so much laughter. And Warnie talks about that.
I mean, I assume there's tensions as well. Like, what did they fight about?
I think Mrs. Moore.
Yeah.
I don't think Warnie understood that whole situation coming up. Warnie disagreed with some of Jack's assessments of the schools they went to. Surprised by Joy, Jack torches some of these schools, describes them as just the worst places ever. And Warnie had a great time there. He says it's one of the few arguments he ever won against C.S. Lewis was, yeah, you were unfair. And he's like, yeah, I think I was.
It's an interesting question because, I mean, you're my brother, and I don't remember really liking either of my brothers until they moved out. Living with someone is an entirely different thing. So not only were they brothers, but also co-workers and roommates. So it's a pretty elaborate relationship if you think about it. More than most of us have with our siblings.
Yeah, they seem close in a way that I think many of us could envy.
Well, and I was curious if there was tensions about like second fiddle. I mean, for Jack to be, C.S. Lewis to be so famous, we all know his name still, that there's not some kind of tension, or even the Inklings, that, Warnie's just this tag along to the group. No, it seems like he was a really important contributor. I read somewhere that he was a very close friend with Charles Williams.
Yes.
So he played his own role seemingly without a lot of tension or competition kind of feeling.
It's very much why I think he was a great man. The more I learn about him, he seemed to have so little ego, so little look at me. He really, truly, and, I read through 20 years of letters to a woman missionary, and throughout all of them, I never caught a whiff of envy or jealousy or I wish I was more famous or more important. If anything, he was kind of annoyed at how much attention he did get because people kept showing up to the kilns because that's where C.S. Lewis lived. No, he just seems singularly humble in that way, and it's really disarming. And I have never read about anybody who didn't like Warnie. Now, I'm sure there were those who didn't, but when you read about the Inklings and their interactions or those kinds of things, Warnie was just always good. He was always just one of the guys, and everyone was happy he was there.
I love that. I mean, especially for them to have lost their mother so early, you could see it going the other way. Especially if they didn't like the same schools. They're not exactly the same, but no, that in the end, it brought them closer. And for such a long time. I mean, they lived together for decades. And worked together for decades. I mean, that's really awesome. I love that.
Yeah, they bought the house together. The Kilns was, 1929, somewhere around there? It could be a little bit off, but around that time. And then C.S. Lewis didn't die until 63. And so they shared the Kilns. And then that's after their childhood together and then their 20s where they were still close. So just incredible. And again, that picture of Warnie racing across France in a motorcycle because he heard his brother had been injured is just... I mean, that's just touching. Truly.
So I did read that Warner lived almost a decade more than his younger brother.
He's 73.
Does he talk? Maybe the memoir came out before that, but have you read anything about just his grief, how he processed since Jack was so forthcoming with his grief after the death of his wife? I was just curious if that's there.
I think that's part of what this memoir was. This collection of letters didn't come out very long after C.S. Lewis passed. And so I think part of his grief was this memoir of working that out. I just want to end it with one more story, one more family story, and I'm going to get the details wrong, so I won't try, so I'm just going to give the shell of this. As he was dying, C.S. Lewis's mind started to slip, as is often the case. He didn't recognize people around him. It was sad towards the end, and this is a story I heard Walter Hooper writes.
I totally know what story you're going to tell.
Do you want to tell it? It's a great story.
I don't remember the name. You go.
Mrs. Moore's daughter, Moraine, came to visit him. And this is at the very end. Now, she had a very interesting life. Somehow through this, I mean, it's a story in its own right, but she became, I think, a baroness. She inherited a castle in Scotland and title and lands. I mean, she became a princess practically kind of overnight. This woman who was, had no money, and it's just a wonderful story. But even with all that, she came to see Jack because Jack had taken care of her for so long, and they were family. Walter Hooper warned her, though, that he might not recognize her. He's not recognizing people very close to him. He didn't recognize Tolkien when he came to visit him there at the end, so he didn't have a lot of hopes for Moraine. She says, "It's me, Jack. It's Moraine." And he stops her. Says, No, no, no. It is my lady, Dame Marine Helen Dunbar, 8th Baroness. And she laughs and says, "Jack, how can you possibly remember that with everything going on?" And Jack's response is so good. He says, "On the contrary, how could somebody like me, being who I am, ever forget a fairy tale?" Happy C.S. Lewis Reading Day, everybody. And with that, we'll turn the page, and we hope you join us for the next chapter.